Usually when we look at a painting, there's this baseline expectation of beauty.
Right, yeah, you want it to be aesthetically pleasing.
Exactly. You walk into a museum, you see a landscape or a portrait,
Yeah.
and the artist is essentially saying, like, look at how well I capture the light. It's comforting.
It is, it's safe.
But then you walk into a room, and you are confronted by a canvas that is massive. I mean, roughly 11 feet tall and 25 feet wide.
That's huge.
Yeah, and it is entirely painted in harsh, unforgiving black, white, and gray. There's a horse screaming in agony, a mother holding a dead child.
Right, so that expectation of comfort is just completely shattered.
Completely. We're looking at a message that is terrifying. And, well, unpacking how that terrifying message translates to the arguments we have in modern corporate boardrooms, and even how artificial intelligence is mimicking those arguments, is the mission of the chat log we are diving into today.
It's quite the journey.
It really is. Okay, let's unpack this, because looking at the sheer scope of these notes you provided, the connections here are just wild.
They are. It's a massive intellectual footprint. We are tracking one central dilemma through vastly different eras.
Right.
Whether it's Pablo Picasso, ancient Athenian philosophers, middle managers, or, language models, they are all circling the exact same human vulnerability.
Which is what, exactly?
How do we separate a truthful, necessary message from the incredibly persuasive, flashy techniques used to deliver it?
Wow. Yeah, that is the question. And to even begin answering that, the sources anchor us to a visceral starting point, which is Picasso's Guernica.
A perfect place to start.
Let's set the reality of what this painting represents. We are in April 1937, right in the middle of the Spanish Civil War.
It's specifically April 26th. Nazi German and fascist Italian air forces dropped bombs on the Basque town of Guernica.
And this wasn't a military target, right?
Not at all. This was a Monday, a market day, and the town was essentially defenseless. The historical consensus is that this lacked any real strategic military objective.
So it
was a psychological experiment, an experiment in civilian terror bombing. The death toll varies in historical accounts from maybe 150 to over 1,600 innocent people.
That's horrifying.
It was a brutal test of what happens when you target a population's psyche rather than its military.
Now, Picasso wasn't anywhere near this. He was living in Paris at the time.
Right, safe in France.
And the Spanish Republic had previously asked him to paint a mural for the Paris World's Fair. But he had been, dragging his feet.
He didn't have a subject.
Exactly. Then the bombing happens. But because he is hundreds of miles away, he doesn't see the rubble or the victims firsthand.
He's relying on the media.
Right. He relies completely on a piece of journalism by a British reporter named George Steer in the Times. So Picasso is reading these newspaper reports, looking at the black and white photos from the front lines, and he absorbs that distant data.
And then he creates this massive mural in just about a month.
Which is almost like he's acting as a remote internet journalist or like a beta synthesizer today.
That's a great analogy. It requires a fascinating creative leap. He wasn't painting a literal street corner in Guernica.
Right, he wasn't there to sketch it.
Exactly. He had to figure out how to convey the truth of the event without having the literal visual facts right in front of him. Which brings us to why the painting looks the way it does.
Black and white.
Yeah. Why choose a monochrome palette? Why restrict an 11 by 25 foot canvas to just black, white, and gray?
You would think a painter wanting to show the horror of war would use, red for blood or the orange of explosions.
But using red or orange makes it a traditional painting. By sticking to black, white, and gray, Picasso was mimicking the medium of the information itself.
Oh, because he got the news from a newspaper.
Precisely. He was reading newspapers. He was looking at high-contrast black and white photography. So by painting the mural in those same tones, he strips away the aesthetic distraction of color.
That makes so much sense.
It gives the canvas the documentary, testimonial weight of a newsreel. He's essentially telling the viewer, this isn't a beautiful interpretation. This is the stark reported news.
There's actually a famous anecdote in the notes about that starkness. During the occupation of Paris, a German officer is in Picasso's studio, sees a photo of Guernica, and asks him, "Did you do this?"
It's such a chilling moment.
Yeah, and Picasso looks at him and says, "No, you did."
Wow.
He understood the painting was just a mirror. And that deliberate choice to avoid a pretty realistic landscape actually points to a major frustration the listener highlighted in the chat log.
Yes, the frustration with art critics.
Right, because we all accept Guernica is a masterpiece.
Mm-hmm.
But the listener gets incredibly annoyed reading art criticism where experts only focus on Picasso's avant-garde cubist technique.
They miss the forest for the trees.
Exactly. They spend pages discussing the fractured geometric shapes and completely gloss over the fact that the painting is screaming about slaughtered civilians.
And that frustration is the perfect entry point into the core framework of today's deep dive. It introduces the duality of thesis versus rhetoric.
Okay, let's break those down.
Whenever humans communicate, there are two distinct layers operating simultaneously. The thesis is the message. It's the moral core, the actual what is being said.
So the thesis of Guernica is war is horrific.
Yes. And then you have the rhetoric. That's the technique, the form, the style, the how it is being delivered.
In the art world, people usually pick a side, don't they?
They do. You have formalists who argue that art should only be judged by its rhetoric.
Like the value is purely in the brushstrokes, the lighting, the geometry.
Right. Then you have moralists who argue the value is entirely in the thesis. Does the art convey a good ethical message?
But the chat log brings in a philosopher named Barry's Gout, who proposes something called ethicism.
Yeah, Gout says you can't actually separate them. If the message of a painting is morally repulsive, that repulsiveness damages the artistic quality of the work itself.
And the sources provide the ultimate stress test for this idea. Leni Riefenstahl,
Oh, absolutely. She directed Nazi propaganda films in the 1930s, like Triumph of the Will.
which is a very tough watch.
But if you look at those films strictly through the lens of a formalist, the rhetoric is undeniably brilliant.
I mean, she invented camera angles, tracking shots, and editing rhythms that modern directors still use today. The technique is flawless.
But the thesis is Nazism.
Right. It is a horrifying, indefensible message.
So the brilliant rhetoric doesn't save the film. It actually makes the toxic thesis far more dangerous.
I have to wonder how those strict formalist art critics would handle Guernica if we swap the thesis.
What do you mean?
Well, if Picasso had used that exact same fractured, monochrome cubist technique to paint like a bowl of fruit in a wine glass, it wouldn't be hanging in a dedicated room at the Reina Sofia Museum.
No, it wouldn't.
The technique alone doesn't make you feel the weight of a terror bombing.
What's fascinating here is how Guernica achieves a rare, perfect marriage of the two.
How so?
Well, the technique of cubism involves breaking subjects apart and reassembling them in unnatural, chaotic ways. What better way to depict the literal and psychological shattering of a town hit by bombs?
Oh, wow. I never thought of it that way.
The chaotic, violent technique perfectly serves the chaotic, terrifying thesis. The technique amplifies the message rather than distracting from it.
But if it is that dangerous to separate the message from the delivery in a museum, imagine the damage it can do in a government assembly.
Or a courtroom.
Right, and the ancient Greeks certainly saw this coming. The chat log traces this exact tension back to the founders of Western philosophy. Plato was dealing with a group of people in Athens known as the Sophists.
The Sophists were essentially the first high-paid freelance consultants. They traveled around selling the art of persuasion to wealthy Athenian families.
Here's where it gets really interesting. They sound a lot like modern PR spin doctors or slick salespeople.
Yes, or modern algorithm optimizers. They don't actually care if the video is true or helpful or ethical. They only care about the mechanics of engagement.
They just want to keep your eyes on the screen.
Exactly. The Sophists were masters of rhetoric, but they had absolutely zero allegiance to a thesis. They bragged about being able to argue both sides of any issue and win.
And Plato hated that.
Plato found this terrifying. He viewed rhetoric as a manipulative trick, akin to feeding someone junk food because it tastes good, even though it ruins their health.
So what was his solution?
He wanted society to rely entirely on strict philosophical dialogue to find the ultimate truth. But his student, Aristotle, took a much more pragmatic approach.
Aristotle wrote a foundational text, literally titled Rhetoric.
Right. He realized that in human society, you cannot mathematically prove everything. You cannot put a proposed tax law in a beaker and scientifically measure if it is just.
Because human problems are messy, they require judgment calls.
Aristotle understood that, so he introduced a concept called the enthymeme.
That's a very intimidating word.
It sounds academic, but the mechanism is incredibly simple. An enthymeme is just an argument where you leave the obvious part unspoken, relying on the audience's shared common sense to fill in the blank.
Give me an example.
If I say to you, he is coughing a lot, he must be sick, I don't need to explicitly state the premise that coughing is a symptom of illness. We both already know that.
Oh, got it. So we're deducing based on probable premises.
Yes. Aristotle realized humans don't need exhausting mathematical proofs for every single sentence. We rely on these shared, unspoken assumptions to function.
He was basically trying to rescue rhetoric from the Sophists.
Exactly. He was saying, look, persuasion isn't inherently evil. It is a necessary tool we use to figure out the best possible action when we don't have perfect information.
So the goal was always the thesis finding the truth. Rhetoric was simply the shovel you used to dig it up.
But the sources map out how history completely shattered Aristotle's unified system.
Yeah, as we move through the scientific revolution, society decided that truth was the exclusive domain of microscopes, math, and later strict data.
If you couldn't prove it in a lab, it wasn't a hard truth.
Because of that, rhetoric lost its job as a tool for discovery. It got demoted to mere style, or worse, deceitful corporate spin.
Right.
But if Aristotle's system relied on people using rhetoric in good faith to find the truth, what happens when good faith doesn't exist?
That is the modern dilemma.
Like, what happens when you are in a boardroom at 3 p.m. and nobody cares about the truth? They just want to protect their department's budget.
Which brings us to a highly relatable observation the listener makes in the chat log. We have all suffered through meetings that dance but don't move forward.
Ugh, yes. It's just a room full of competing rhetoric with no shared mechanism for testing the thesis.
It is a room full of modern sophists. Everyone is optimizing for their own outcome.
So how do we fix it?
The sources introduce a modern academic field called argumentation theory. Since we no longer use Aristotle's framework, we need new structural rules for human disagreement.
The log highlights Stephen Toulmin, right?
Yes, Toulmin was a philosopher who looked at how lawyers argue in court and realized everyday people need a similar practical structure.
He breaks an argument down into 3 main pieces: the claim, the data, and the warrant. Let's ground this in reality.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's imagine a classic boardroom fight. Karen from operations says, we need to switch all our teams to this expensive new project management software. That is her claim.
The destination she wants the room to reach.
Right. Then she provides her data. She says, the new software has built-in AI task automation.
That is the vehicle she is using to get to the destination.
But the most important part of Toulmin's model is the warrant. The warrant is the underlying assumption that connects the data to the claim. It is the road the vehicle drives on.
So in this case, what's the warrant?
The unspoken warrant is AI task automation will actually save our teams enough time to justify the massive financial cost of the software.
Perfect. If the road is washed out, you don't reach the destination. By forcing an argument into Toulmin's structure, you stop yelling about whether Karen is right or wrong and you start examining the warrant.
You test the structural integrity of the assumption.
Exactly. Toulmin's model forces you to map out how you are reaching your conclusion, rather than just shouting your conclusion louder than everyone else.
The sources also bring in Franz van Emeren and his concept of pragmadialectics.
Which is a brutally dense academic term.
Very dense, but it's essentially a very practical survival guide. He outlines 10 explicit rules for having a constructive discussion without it evolving into a shouting match.
For example, Rule 4 states that you can only defend a standpoint by advancing argumentation related to that exact standpoint.
Meaning you cannot shift the burden of proof, and you cannot attack the person's character instead of their data.
Right, no ad hominem attacks. If you violate these rules, the argument derails into what we call a fallacy.
The chat log also touches on Jürgen Habermas, who dreamed of an ideal speech situation.
Where everyone drops their egos, ignores the corporate hierarchy, and allows only the single best argument to win, completely free of coercion.
Okay, I am going to play the skeptic here.
Go for it.
Nobody stands up in a tense Q3 budget meeting and draws Toulmin's warrant on a whiteboard. And nobody tells their boss they are violating Rule 4 of pragmadialectics.
No, they don't.
When jobs are on the line and people are stressed, do these academic frameworks actually survive contact with human emotion?
They don't survive if you expect people to cheerfully announce them out loud. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, you are hitting on the exact reason these frameworks are necessary. We need them as institutional safeguards.
Countless.
Well, you don't have to draw a diagram on a whiteboard, but internalizing Toulmin's model gives you a diagnostic tool. When a meeting is going in circles, you can mentally step back and realize, we are arguing over the claim, but we haven't actually agreed on the warrant.
Oh, I see.
It allows you to de-escalate the conflict by asking a structural question rather than making a personal attack. You aren't attacking Karen's intelligence, you are just asking to test the load-bearing capacity of her data.
It forces the rhetoric to serve the thesis again.
Exactly. We can't always rely on the individual goodwill or virtue of every speaker like Aristotle hoped. We need explicit rules to protect the thesis when debates get heated.
Those safeguards might handle human egos and corporate politics, but the sources introduce a completely new variable.
A very big
A
variable.
variable that doesn't have an ego, doesn't get stressed, and can generate perfect rhetoric on demand. We are talking about artificial intelligence.
This is where the historical theory we have been discussing collides violently with our immediate future.
The listener outlines an experiment they ran in the chat log. They took a very dry, academic, dense piece of business management theory, a pure, unvarnished thesis.
And then what did they do?
They fed it into an AI and asked the AI to transform it. And the AI instantly converted this dense text into a highly accessible, beautifully formatted 7-page web manga, complete with a video format.
Wow.
The AI completely generated the rhetoric.
Think about what that means for the barrier to entry. Historically, if you had a brilliant thesis, say a cure for a disease, a new philosophy, a profound realization about war, you still had to spend decades mastering the rhetoric to share it.
Right, you had to learn to paint like Picasso, or write like Plato, or direct like Riefenstahl.
Your message was bottlenecked by your technical skill. Now that bottleneck is gone.
Anyone can generate high-quality, deeply persuasive delivery formats instantly.
Yes.
So what does this all mean? Because it seems like the exact same tool that empowers a manager to turn a boring training manual into an engaging comic book. Well, it can also be used to generate beautifully polished, utterly convincing garbage.
It is AI as the ultimate realization of the Sophists. It is Plato's nightmare scaled to a global infrastructure. AI language models do not know anything in a human sense. They predict the next most likely token in a sequence.
Right, they don't actually care about the truth.
They can perfectly mimic the structure of a Toolman argument. They can deploy emotional cues. They can format a presentation flawlessly, but they have zero allegiance to whether the underlying thesis is true.
Which means we are facing a flood of perfect persuasion, masking a total vacuum of substance.
Which shifts the burden entirely onto us.
Yeah, the chat log emphasizes that, as we move forward, human literacy isn't just about reading words. It is about developing an acute sensitivity to separate the medium from the message.
We have to be vigilant.
Now, AI is clearly an incredible tool for internal exploration. I mean, the listener used AI to generate the very chat log we are studying today, mapping out complex philosophical connections.
It's fantastic for that.
But when it comes to human discussion, where real-world interests, conflict, and real resources are at stake, you cannot outsource the final judgment to a language model.
Because as rhetoric becomes totally commoditized, as perfect grammar, stunning visuals, and flawless formatting becomes something you can generate with a keystroke, the premium shifts.
What do you mean?
The true value of the future will be the thesis. Having an authentic human belief, a hard-won truth, or actual domain expertise is about to become the most valuable currency in existence.
Because the rhetoric will be cheap.
Exactly. When everything looks and sounds like a masterpiece, we will be forced to judge things strictly by the reality of their message.
Man, we have covered massive ground today. We started by standing in front of Picasso's Guernica, feeling the visceral shock of a terrifying thesis delivered through a perfectly matched, chaotic technique.
A perfect union of the two.
Then we traced a historical divorce of truth and style from the ancient Sophists to the scientific revolution.
We found practical, structural lifelines in argumentation theory to save our corporate meetings from spinning into oblivion.
And finally, we confronted how AI is permanently altering the balance of persuasion.
It really proves that while our tools evolve from, oil paints to algorithms, the fundamental architecture of human communication and human vulnerability remains remarkably constant.
To you, the listener, whether you are walking through a quiet art gallery, sitting in a windowless conference room where the conversation is paralyzed, or scrolling through an endless feed of impossibly slick AI-generated content, you are armed with a new filter.
You are.
You have the ability to step back, look past the flash, the volume, and the polish, and ask a very simple grounding question. What is the actual thesis here, and what is just the rhetoric?
And this raises one final important question to consider, sort of pushing the boundaries of the sources you provided.
Okay, let's hear it.
If AI continues to rapidly evolve to the point where it can perfectly simulate the specific rhetoric of human emotion, the cadence of deep moral conviction, and the nuance of flawless logical persuasion, will there come a day when a machine's generated thesis becomes utterly indistinguishable from a genuinely held human belief?
That is a terrifying thought.
And if that day arrives, how will our ancient, hard-won rules of debate handle an opponent that has absolutely no real-world skin in the game?
It makes you wonder. The next time you are moved by a brilliantly constructed argument or a stunning piece of visual art, you might have to pause and ask yourself who or what is actually holding the brush.